Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Over the last 6 months, I wasn't sure how this little experiment of making content would go. I lost my job and a lot of my resources to make new things, so it's been an uphill battle. But it's also been a worthwhile one, and I think that I finally found a groove for myself I can be happy with moving forward. Something I always like doing at the end of a year is looking back on my favorite things, be it music, films, or games. I was opting to do maybe more top 10 lists, but settled on games being enough for now. That out of the way, here are my favorite games this year. Like I mentioned, I was out of a job and money has been incredibly tight, so really the only resource I've had has been Game Pass. Thankfully, Game Pass has provided plenty of bangers in 2021, and Game Pass or not, I hope you give some of these games a try and see if you like them for yourself. Without further ado, let's get right into it, my top 10 of the year in no particular order. Before the campaign was released, I was considering the inclusion of Halo Infinite on the strength of its robust multiplayer alone. But with the campaign, Halo doesn't just deserve a spot in my top 10, but is a strong contender for my overall favorite game this year. The thing about Halo Infinite's campaign is that it's not a sequel to Halo 5. The fascinating narrative structure is one part of why I love it so much. Halo Infinite takes place basically after a Halo 6 that never happened, leaving players to reconstruct the events between 5 and Infinite. The basic mystery also forms the glue that holds it all together. Halo Infinite is at once a sequel to Combat Evolved and Halo 4, focusing on the narrative strengths and deconstruction of Master Chief as a character that works so well in 4's story, while focusing on the mystery and epic feeling of exploration and discovery that fueled the adventure of Combat Evolved. The result is 343's strongest Halo yet, one that feels distinctly authentic yet fresh. I could honestly talk for hours about the subdued and memorable story, which delivers not only the best form of Master Chief, but probably the best and most memorable antagonist the series has ever seen. But even if Halo's story weren't great, it would make it on this list through the strength of its gameplay alone. Infinite's moment-to-moment combat is sublime, reaching the buttery smooth heights of first-person badassery previously only climbable by the likes of Titanfall 2 and Doom. The biggest innovation to the formula is changeable equipment, which includes a grappling hook that should be in every game ever from now on. Honestly, it reminds me a little bit of Devil May Cry, where each of Chief's 4 gadgets stand for a different style of approach, from the aggressive speed of a thruster pack to the stop-and-drop defense of a droppable shield wall. On their own, they are good ways to freshen up gameplay, but when switching between them on the fly, they are a satisfying way to dominate any obstacle. I was worried when it was announced Halo would be going open world, but Halo is probably the best example I can think of where a series opened itself up without sacrificing its identity. It's less that Halo Infinite is open world, and more that you're simply playing through one long Halo level with more ways to tackle your problems than ever. Halo Infinite is a game that just feels so tightly made top to bottom in a way we rarely see today, especially in open world games. I can't wait to see what adventures lie in store for 343's Halo universe next, and I'm glad they finally found a way to stand on their own and push the franchise ahead in a meaningful and satisfying way. One of the more interesting pieces of vampire fiction I've personally read in years, Cross the Moon is a visual novel that puts a very stylish and none too Suda51 spin on a world where vampires and humans live together in something resembling harmony. From the $5 gurus at Radalaika Games, publishers behind such bargain greats as Football Game, Cross the Moon isn't going to be a visual novel for everyone. It doesn't have the exploration and minigames of Danganronpa, it doesn't have any dating or relationship elements to manage, and it doesn't even have the puzzle solving of something like Silvercase. And I wouldn't expect it to, honestly. This is as indie as indie visual novels get. But what makes Cross the Moon worth checking out, aside from a great price point, is its fantastic style and world building, as well as a cast of memorable characters. The ways in which Cross the Moon creates a world through these characters is really something special, exploring the possibilities of a vampire-infested world through relationships like a high school human girl infatuated with a charismatic young vampire, and weighing their future together while questioning if he's just using her as a personal blood bank. The game also explores the idea of vampires becoming second-class citizens, looked down on and discriminated against by the rest of society. An interesting spin on vampire media where the presence of bloodsuckers in the real world usually attributes them to an all-powerful Illuminati-like force controlling humanity behind the scenes. Speaking of scenes, I adore the style of Cross the Moon. The set design for the real-life photograph backgrounds perfectly captures the late 80s vibe the game is going for, and the saturation-shifted color palettes complement the stark, though finely detailed character art. The game also does an admirable job of presenting an alternate history world without leaving out the real-world struggles and prejudices of the past. This is an 80s where vampires roam and hang out in nightclubs, but also a world where a Japanese character will painfully reflect on the destruction wrought on her country at the end of the last major war, and where a black woman will still express fear of being prejudiced against not for being a vampire, but for being black in a predominantly white area. Call it woke or virtue signaling or whatever, but moments like this help each character inhabit the world Cross the Moon creates, breathing life into their hopes, anxieties, and the individual paths they take, while helping to flesh out a world that might otherwise come across as incredibly silly. If you have a chance, pick it up. Cross the Moon is just $5 and is available on PlayStation, Switch, and Xbox. One of the many pleasant surprises on this list I wouldn't have tried if not for Xbox Game Pass, Unpacking is a deceptively smart puzzle game. When I heard the positive reception it was getting, I decided to dig in as it was new and free on Game Pass, and at first I didn't really get it. You start in a small child's room unpacking various toys, clothes, and other belongings, and trying to find space for them on increasingly cluttered shelves. It's a simple concept, and thanks to an easy-to-grasp interface and lo-fi chill beats, it makes for a relaxing time. But that's not all Unpacking has to offer. The true charm of the game lies in how it uses its simple premise to tell a relatable and, at times, profound story. You follow a character from that little kid's room through college, heartbreak, and beyond, following a story told in nothing but what they take with them and what they choose to keep around them. It's not a tearjerker or anything, it's not really that kind of story. Unpacking is much more subdued, in keeping with its minimalist presentation. In fact, much of the emotional resonance come from what the player recognizes, little touches like the character having a diploma hanging on her wall for several chapters, but once they move in with an ill-fated romantic partner, there's no space on the wall to hang the proud achievement. It takes advantage of the game's premise to maximize environmental storytelling at the cost of all other kinds of storytelling, and it works. This is a game that will impact some more than others. If I played it as a teen, I may have appreciated it, but I don't think I'd have connected with it. But having moved out from my parents, moved in with romantic partners, and also separated from those partners, Unpacking is an experience that manages to encapsulate, even in brief, the seemingly uncapturable sensations of isolation, nostalgia, and comfort that can come from finding a new place to call home. It's a small game with really one trick to it, but that trick works so well and is implemented in so many different ways that it's worth seeing through to the end. Unpacking is definitely a narrative experience to look at if you're looking for stellar ways of how video games can involve players in their narrative in an emotional and unique way unlike any other medium. Resident Evil 7 is one of my favorite games ever. Resident Evil Remake 2 and 3 have been like horror heaven for me, and I even played a lot of Resident Evil Resistance. So it's safe to say my expectations for Village were pretty high, and Capcom exceeded them masterfully, delivering yet another gem in the crown of their ongoing Resident Evil comeback streak. Resident Evil Village is a lot of different things. It's the culmination of gameplay styles started in Resident Evil 7. It's an homage and throwback to the themes and systems of Resident Evil 4, with elements like large, organization-heavy inventories and regular merchant encounters returning. And it's also a huge divergence for traditional Resident Evil level design, offering a semi-open hub world to explore, finding treasures and completing small sub-objectives that reward players. The game's design doesn't allow for full freeform exploration, so anybody expecting it to pull a Breath of the Wild may be a bit disappointed. But the encounters it does offer are masterfully unique from one another, offering a sample platter that should satisfy casual horror hounds and longtime Resident Evil fans alike. Resident Evil Village also succeeds with its story and world building, crafting an inherently ridiculous sectioned-off corner of Europe where lichens roam and vampire mommies abduct fair maidens from the town. There's a level of playing everything straight that works fairly well here, and the character moments are among the strongest they've ever been. Faint praise for a series like Resident Evil, but I found myself genuinely invested and interested by the end of Ethan Winter's European vacation. While I know a lot of critics will probably laugh at the ridiculous nature of the game's final twist, I found it to be incredibly creative and well played, and in keeping with a long tradition of Japanese-created horror and sci-fi media. With all that said, you should play Resident Evil Village. Everyone should. It's an impeccably crafted game from start to finish, polished to a mirror sheen and packed with innovative and interesting new directions for the series to pursue in future entries, while still reflecting on and refining a plethora of series elements that fans fell in love with years ago. Hitman 3 was one of those games that follows you throughout the year. It doesn't matter when it came out, it was always going to be one of my favorite games. The thing is, I had previously tried to get into the modern Hitman games. I tried my luck with 1 and 2, and nothing stuck. I love immersive sims and system-driven games like Deus Ex and Dishonored, so I was disappointed I couldn't get with the vibe of Hitman. But when Hitman 3 launched, it was like a switch was turned on and I saw the glorious light. I'm including the full package of Hitman 1 and 2 plus all the side missions in my critique here, because that encompasses the true, full Hitman 3 experience. While the main story is a satisfying spy-ish thriller and wraps up Agent 47's saga with style, the real meat in these games is the sheer volume of gameplay. Each of the incredibly varied maps are full of side stories, side objectives, secret hidden weapons, and dozens of other collectibles and objectives to uncover. The brilliance is that the game isn't made to be completed on a first time through. You may have a rough time with one mission, but upon completing it, you get a set of tools to complete it faster and more efficiently next time, stacking these different progressions on top of one another until you're the most ruthless, efficient assassin you can be. There was a good month-and-a-half span where I was addicted to completing the game as much as possible, and while I never came close to scratching the surface of completing the game's many maps and missions, it remains a satisfying experience to look back on and one to revisit. I even had a lot of fun with the PSVR mode, which allows every main campaign map to be played in PlayStation VR. While the draw distance in a lot of larger areas and the overall detail suffers, it's still an incredibly immersive experience and one of the better VR games I've played. Hitman 3 is a game that is at once engrossing and intimidating in its scope, but throughout its stealth murder mystery, you'll find yourself laughing at its absurdity, yet unable to escape its hold. In many ways, it encapsulates the fun and levity games can have when they don't take themselves too seriously, while still managing to be a seriously good time. LEGO Builder's Journey might be one of the most disappointing games I've seen this year. Not because it's a bad game, but it's just so damn disappointing I've barely heard anything about it from either content creators or mainstream game journalism. Like most people who play games, I think LEGO is synonymous with a bevy of tired cash-in license games that wore out their creative welcome a long time ago, and that's totally fair. But LEGO Builder's Journey is an entirely different kind of game. It's a simple and minimalistic puzzle game, and maybe one of the best I've played all year. Using a very realistic art style, Builder's Journey silently tells the story of a parent figure and a child figure who love to build and play together, but are torn apart by the parent figure's regular working duties. Alone, the child is left to explore their own creativity and find a way to get back to their parent. It's a simple and effectively told narrative that relies heavily on emotional cues that I think cut deep for any parent or family member who has fond memories of building LEGO with other family members. It effectively captures the wonder, creativity, and limitless potential of LEGO as a brand, stripping away the edifice the brand has coagulated in gaming of being a churn of endless licensed content. And on top of being an effective and graphically stylish story, it's also a satisfying puzzler. The basic premise is that you're often tasked with moving from one end of the stage to another, but the myriad of ways in which the game changes its mechanics keeps the experience fresh throughout. Part of its charm is that, with an admittedly brief 2-ish hour running time, the game never feels stale, switching up the level mechanics and settings just when one area or gimmick begins to feel a little bit too safe. I'm not even a puzzle game person, but LEGO Builder's Journey has so much charm, creativity, and general good vibes, I can't help but recommend it. I truly hope there's more room for the LEGO brand to grow with games like this, and I hope anyone who has fond memories of building LEGO with their family give this game a chance and find something to connect with. I am a huge Swery fan. I have the collector's edition of The Missing, I have a Deadly Premonition themed tattoo. He will always be one of my favorite game developers. That being said, I was incredibly disappointed in Deadly Premonition 2. From story to world design, while it had the facade of a Swery game, it was missing so much of the often flawed technical nuance and ambition that have made his game so enjoyable in the past. I'm glad to say that The Good Life isn't anything like that, and is a welcome return to form for one of the most creative, unique voices in gaming. In fact, I think it might be his best game ever, at least on a technical level. Sorry, but The Missing will always hold a special place in my heart. You play as a sardonic American photojournalist investigating a seemingly quaint British countryside town. The setup is immediately reminiscent of Deadly Premonition, with a quirky outsider experiencing culture clashing headfirst into a convoluted web of small-town conspiracy, represented with a wide variety of strange characters. The core mystery of this small town is a bizarre magic that allows people to change into cats and dogs. And all of these elements are seen in gameplay, giving the game a unique feel compared to other open-world games, detective games, and even Swery's own purview. You can take pictures and upload them to earn money. Pictures also serve as collectibles. You can change into a cat or a dog form at any time, each form giving you a variety of unique abilities to navigate the environment, battle wildlife, forage for supplies, and more. There's also an incredibly in-depth cooking and crafting system, and returning hunger, sleep, and cleanliness mechanics, though they feel notably more refined and engaging than Deadly Premonition 2. The core mystery and story won't be for everyone. With its more cartoonish aesthetic, which works wonderfully and gives the game a cohesive and unique look that stands apart from previous games from Swery, while also looking the best technically, The Good Life has more comedic elements and bizarre character outbursts than you might be used to. It's a strange game where the eccentricities of its characters have been turned to 11, and that will understandably not be everyone's particular cup of tea. What I can say is that this is far and away the best performing game from White Owl Studio, at least technically, running at a smooth frame rate and keeping loading times minimal. If you're looking for a unique, charming, and satisfying mystery adventure that immerses you fully into a strange world, The Good Life is the game you're looking for. Its inclusion on Xbox Game Pass makes it yet another win for Xbox this year, and I hope it serves as a jumping-off point for players to get into more unique, strange, non-AAA titles like those from creators like Swery and Suda51. I especially recommend it for players burned out on open worlds full of guard posts to take over and endless enemies to kill. Quake might seem like a bit of a lackluster answer, and normally I wouldn't put a re-release or simple remaster on a top 10 Game of the Year list. But the 2021 release of Quake is no normal remaster. Bethesda put everything they learned from the flawed Doom ports a few years ago into this game, delivering not only a definitive console version of a celebrated and beloved shooter classic, but the definitive version of the game in general. Similar to Duke Nukem World Tour, Quake comes with some all-new chapters developed specifically for this release, all of which play like the classic game but benefit from additional rendering and horsepower the 90s version never had. Quake's celebrated multiplayer returns, and is a welcome reprieve from modern live service and battle royale-infested multiplayer shooter landscapes. And of course, the main game features the original's memorable campaign and each of the official expansions that were released. While the expansions aren't as strong as the main game, and occasionally utilize a few too many unfair deaths and enemy ambushes to create challenge, they aren't anywhere near as hard to parse as Doom's two main expansions, so even for casual retro FPS enthusiasts. On top of all this, Bethesda is still releasing new content for Quake, including a multiplayer arena mode that was just released. With so much new content and incredible quality of life changes like the Doom-style slow-mo radial weapon selection and a host of graphical options ranging from classic grungy pixels to pixel-perfect HD polygons, this is the way to experience one of the most important pieces of gaming and shooter history out there. And at a $10 price point, any shooter fan can get their fill on a budget, with plenty of content left to come back for more. If you would have told me that Forza Horizon 5 was going to be one of my favorite games this year, I would have thought it would be a pretty bad year. I'm not a car person, I'm not a sports or racing game person, but I am absolutely a Forza Horizon 5 person. Horizon 5 is a masterclass in having stuff. Stuff to do, stuff to look for, stuff to look at all the time. A smorgasbord of content that wouldn't succeed as much as it does if it didn't feel so great to play. And made by a team that's been making these games for well over a decade, it's no surprise the racing feels finely tuned and each vehicle feels satisfyingly unique. What did surprise me was how Forza rewards you for almost everything, primarily through the skill system. You find a new road, jump off a ramp, or even just reach a top speed, it all factors in, making for a constantly rewarding experience. Like there's always stuff to do and look at, you'll always be given stuff to feel good about accomplishing. It might seem overwhelming at first, but the sheer freedom given to you means you can take the game in at whatever pace or order you want. You can choose the car type for whatever race you want. You can choose to buy or sell whatever cars you have, and you get plenty for free too. It's a mostly frictionless experience to becoming engrossed, making for a game that's at once relaxing to engage with while being addictive to keep playing. The music selection is probably the game's worst aspect and is more than a little ho-hum, but that's honestly my biggest complaint and is easily remedied with some Spotify or Apple Music, depending on your preferred platform. It's hard to get across how much I enjoyed this game. Rarely is a game so simply fun to engage with at nearly every level. There's no big stake story or emotional payoff, just simple gaming fun. Horizon makes driving in a circle more fun than I've ever seen in a driving game, and from someone who mostly just hates racing games, that should tell you a lot about how much I love this experience. Psychonauts 2 was probably my biggest surprise of the year. Having never played the first one, I was sold solely on the game's promise of creative and colorful art design with a few laughs along the way. What I wasn't prepared for was an incredibly empathetic and tender journey through trauma and navigating that trauma with grace. Psychonauts 2 picks up the story from Rhombus of Ruin, another game I didn't play, and starts off at a breakneck pace, throwing players into a world with lots of terms and characters and not a lot of time to figure out what's going on. But once you get into the swing of it, the story and characters truly sing. This is a wild, pulpy world that feels like a Tim Burton-flavored mashup of Control and 70s Jack Kirby comic books, and it works well. In fact, to simply summarize the game using the style and formats of other mediums do it a massive disservice. Psychonauts 2 leverages so much style so consistently and cohesively that it stands on its own as a towering creative achievement. Without spoiling the wonderful stories the game tells, Psychonauts 2 sends you into the personal psyches of a wide variety of characters, with each level you play representing their internal consciousness, their traumas, and the troubles they're trying to resolve. Using a variety of clever gameplay mechanics, including standard platforming and puzzle mechanics that will be familiar to even the most casual players of Mario, you help resolve these issues so that the characters can move forward in their lives. The worlds are masterpieces of art design, environmental storytelling, and gameplay variation. While the objective-based gameplay occasionally drags when meandering about the hub world, I was always ready to play through these mental landscapes to the end. Not only were the personal stories and introspective moments they created incredibly engrossing, but the sheer variety of art style the game goes through, from an absurdist cooking show where audience members are foods who get cooked, to a trippy 60s Technicolor landscape of sights and sounds, are more than worth the price of admission. Psychonauts 2 isn't an easy game to talk about because there are so many different aspects it excels at, but none of them stand on their own. The gameplay is directly tied to the story, which is directly tied to the environments, and so on and so on. In a way, this makes it a perfect game, a great example of how funny, ridiculous, absurd, and often touching games can be when they play to the strengths of the medium as an art form. And that does it. While I was out of a job for half a year, I understandably didn't have much extra scratch lying around to buy $60 new games. Thankfully, Game Pass really came through for me, giving me some of my favorite games of the year. And speaking of my favorite games of the year, No More Heroes 3 was meant to be in my top 10, but then I kind of forgot about putting it there. I honestly wrote this entire script thinking I already had a blurb about it being the pinnacle of Suda's creative style, telling an interesting and human story against the background of its trademark zany ultraviolence. If you like a unique game with a lot of style, which could go for a lot of these games on this list, you absolutely shouldn't miss out on it. It's one of the most creative, crass, and philosophically interesting games I've played this year. So, it's a Suda game, basically. Anyway, get on it, losers. So, anyway, what are your top 10 games this year? Doesn't even need to be from this year, you could just give me your top 10 games ever. Hell, I'm bored, go ahead and give me your top 10 pizza toppings. And of course, like, comment, subscribe, and consider giving a bit to my Patreon. I have some bigger projects and more documentaries planned for next year, and I'd like to hit the $50 threshold per month so I can afford LinkedIn Premium, which is how I contact most developers for my documentary work. It's a big reason why my documentary work has been slow going right now, slow is putting it gently. It's been moving at a glacial pace, even though I hope for it to pick up soon. All that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful Yule for all who celebrate, and a happy holiday for whoever doesn't. I'll see you all next year, and hope you look forward to the projects I have coming up.